Welcome to the Commerce Tomorrow podcast, your one stop to learn about the technology that's powering the future of commerce. Here are your hosts, Dirk and Kelly.
Welcome to our first episode of Commerce Tomorrow. I'm Dirk, and I'm along with my co-host Kelly.
Hey Dirk, thanks. I'm really excited to be here with you launching this podcast today. Dirk, what is the focus of this podcast and why is it different given all of the other podcasts out there in this space?
Well, the idea of Commerce Tomorrow, I think we both had already since a while. And for me, it came out of two things. One was that how we see technology. I think we see it as a main driver of innovation in retail for driving new business models. And these new business models are changing the society that we are all living in, how people interact with brands and consume their products. And the second thing is that there are so many great podcasts out there, also around the topic of commerce, but they are more or less around the business model and the new trends. But only a few of them speak how it's done. How do companies really solve the big issues? And we thought, why not taking over this topic for us and to focus on the intersection of commerce and technology? And as we both are in the e-commerce industry since almost its beginning, and we both have a deep background on the tech side of that's driving this industry, and we know many of the key players, we just said, well, why shouldn't we do it ourselves? And here we are. And as we will cover a lot the technology topics, maybe Kelly, you can tell us what will the podcast not cover?
Yeah, so the podcast is very focused on technology itself and how that technology impacts business. And I think, like you mentioned, Dirk, there are a lot of podcasts out there that are really approaching it from a business first mentality, which is fine. But Dirk and I are very strong technologists, and we really wanted a more tech-focused podcast and the impact that has on technology. But to answer your question, the podcast will definitively not be about Amazon. I think there are quite a few podcasts out there that cover that territory well. It's not going to be very much about marketing. I think marketing as far as it's adjacent to commerce, but not marketing for its own sake. That's a whole separate world. Fulfillment is not something we are really interested in our professional careers, and the commerce platforms we worked on. They're much more focused on capturing the order, and the fulfillment is somewhere else. And we're also not going to make this about commerce tools. And while we both work for commerce tools, we don't want this to be a show about us and the work we're doing. We want this to be more of a general thought leadership show. But the rest of commerce and anything adjacent to that is certainly in scope. So given what we've decided to cover and not cover, Dirk, what does the format look like? What can listeners expect to hear every week?
Our listeners will be able to learn a lot from industry thought leaders. As we thought, we want to have interview kind of style format and inviting leaders in the tech industry, so CIOs and CTOs from well-known international brands and retailers that share their learnings with us. That gives us deep insights on the organization, how they embrace technology, what they have built, what are the things that they're using, what went well, what did not went well. So we will invite them for interviews and have about a 30 to 45 minute conversation with them. Many of them are coming from bigger retailers, brands, manufacturers, and other industries, but we are also open to have discussions with startups that are uprising currently, joining on our show. And maybe if we step a little bit back, Kelly, I think we haven't introduced ourselves well. So maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you did come to commerce, what are the topics that interest you personally?
Sure. So I guess going back to the beginning, I was the nerdy 13-year-old in the basement with a computer in 1996, and we had Prodigy internet service back in those days. And in the 90s, when I was in school, I would make these websites for local businesses. And I remember being like 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, and local businesses would be paying me a lot of money back then. It was like $1,000, $2,000 for a full website. And it just came really easy to me. I really loved that space, and it was really good to me. And when I went off to university, I was looking for a summer job in the space. And it just so happened that Foot Locker is where I was going to school, footlocker.com. And they were going through a massive ATG implementation. I mean, talk about the chances of that. So I started doing wireframe to HTML conversion. So basically taking Photoshop images, and I converted them over to HTML. And from there, I got into the JSP space, and I started doing some front-end development. And it just so happens the king of ATG professional services was there as the lead architect, and we really got along. And he really mentored me for my time there at Foot Locker. And a year later, by the time I left, I was doing back-end ATG development. And given where commerce was back then in the early 2000s, it was just the absolute perfect time to have those types of skills. So I went to Chicago. ATG offered me a job, and I went to Chicago and took it. And there I did, 20, 30 something ATG implementations. And my last one, I was the chief ATG architect for Walmart.com. And that was great. We did, I think, 13 different country implementations. So we did implementations for the UK, for China, for Brazil, all over the place. And I just got the absolute best experience there. I had the pleasure of working with some really sharp people, and I really just got hooked on the space. But then Oracle bought ATG. And at that point, I kind of had to take a decision. And do I continue to do consulting work, or do I want to do something a little different? And consulting is great, but I kind of felt like I had done it. And I really wanted to get into the product side of the organization. And so I went into Oracle as a product manager in their early cloud group, which was a really good experience for me. I got to learn how to run a real software business. And I learned a lot about technology along the way as well. And at Oracle, I had the freedom. I wrote e-commerce in the cloud, about the intersection of e-commerce and all this new cloud computing world that was taking shape out there. And I got to serve as product manager for Java Cloud Service, which is a Java-based PaaS, Java EE. I was a product manager for Axelogic, which was their public cloud machine in a box. And then my last year, and I think what ultimately ended up bringing me to CommerceTools, was that I was responsible for all of the microservices work at Oracle. And I thought there's no better use case in the world than commerce for microservices. And at that point, I'd kind of been missing commerce. Right? I had been off in microservices land for a long time at that point. So I was looking for something different, and I stumbled across CommerceTools, and CommerceTools was perfect for me because it intersected with e-commerce, cloud, and microservices. And at CommerceTools, I am Chief Product Officer, and I run product management, development, and ops. And that's where I am today. So we've covered my background. Dirk, what's your story? How did you get to be on the other side of this speaker right now?
Well, before I start, let me say one thing. So I'm not sure if we have 14-year-old kids listening, but if this should happen, so if you are 14-year-old and you are in your basement right now and sitting in front of your computer, there's nothing wrong with you, right? So looking at Kelly today, he now has a huge basement and he has a pool table in his living room. So you're definitely on the right track, and you don't need to worry about yourself if somebody else is telling so. So there's nothing wrong with being 14 and sitting in the basement. So that said, let's talk or give you a little bit of an insight on me. I'm 39, almost 40, living in the southwest of Munich, having 2 kids. And I started my career, also well, first early on with the computer, being 14, 15, doing the first websites, and then getting to a few .com companies. So I grew up in northern Germany, but moved to the Technical University of Munich, studying computer science over there. That was end of the 90s, and everybody that could turn on a computer and write a little bit of HTML got a job in the .com space at that time, and so did I. But all these companies around me, and also the one that I had been in, suddenly ran out of business, and I really did not like that. And I have seen that 2 times personally, where I led their tech teams for building a mobile internet suite for Palm Pilots and kind of first CMS/CRM platforms out there for another company. They all spent their money somewhere else, and the business model did not work out. So I thought, okay, the next time I do something, I also want to have the business side under control. And the first company actually that I started was an agency. I did that together with a good friend of mine. He's also the co-founder of Commerce Tools, Dennis, who is our COO. But at that years, that has nothing to do with Commerce Tools. We started an agency just to make corporate websites for larger organizations. And more or less by accident, a very good and close friend of mine had started a company in Munich that was called Hybris. Today they belong to SAP. And they started an e-commerce software company and wanted to provide standard software for medium to large companies. And we thought, hey, this is an interesting thing. They had some office space open, and we said, well, yes, we are happy to join and share rooms. And out of that situation, it happened that we, with our little agency, sooner than later started to focus on doing e-commerce projects around Hybris. And we ended up building for companies like Puma.com, Blue Tomato, which today belongs to Zumiez, Henkel, Edeka, and many others, the e-commerce sites. And we also started to host many of them, maintain them, provide support, and all these kind of things. And after a couple of years, that led us to the idea of combining cloud computing, or let's say an elastic infrastructure, together with enterprise commerce software. And that built the foundation of Commerce Tools that I then co-founded end of 2006, and that till today I run as the CEO. And from that on, so there also had been a couple of years, we had been growing fast. Probably we have now one of the leading commerce platforms out there in the market as we focus on APIs and microservices. And we have offices in the US and Netherlands and Germany and a couple of cities. So actually it's quite of a pleasure to work in the industry, as I'm very happy and delighted to meet so many great people on our customer side. So all these brands, retailers, manufacturers, but also all the technology partners. And basically I learn every day from their challenges, from their solutions, their opportunities. And this is something that influenced the idea of this podcast.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. The industry is in a pretty big upheaval right now. Technology is completely changing. I just had a discussion with my old mentor from Foot Locker, and he retired 7 years ago. We were both struggling to understand how it had been 7 years already. And I was walking him through a lot of the work that we're doing these days. How Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure have swept the industry. How people consume software as services. There's an entirely different model out there. He retired when you still bought Sunboxes and you had to rack and stack and cable them. So it's just remarkable how quickly things are changing out there. And I think given where we're at in our day jobs, we get to see a lot of really interesting things out there. So yeah, I'm excited to be doing this with you. And actually, I'm really excited to be doing this with you. I think this will be great. And I look forward to recording a year's worth of interesting podcasts with you for our listeners. Any final comments, Dirk?
Yep, thanks, Kelly. I'm also super excited on starting that. We prepared that now for a while. Since a couple of months, we had been working on the branding, the site, on setting up the first interviews. We have a great lineup for everybody that is listening in. You will find it on our website, on Apple Podcast, on SoundCloud, and a few other channels. Actually, the next episode that you can hear will be with John Panella from Sapient Razorfish, who will share a lot of great insights. We recorded that around the Shop Talk conference, where we also had a couple of other interesting interviews. So if you're not bored yet already, so just skip to the next episode, and we're happy to have you as a listener. So thanks everybody for listening. Please share if you like our podcast, if you have some feedback that you would like to give us, or any comments how we can improve. We promise you the show will get better every time we record a new session. So we're really focusing on that. And I think that's it for today. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.